Have you noticed that something has shifted? Even though the world looks the same, people still talk about the same things. The news still repeats the same narratives. Daily routines continue as usual. And yet, beneath all of this, there is a new silence. Not an empty silence, a silence of disconnection, as if something that used to pull you from the inside has lost its grip. You don't need to understand this with your mind. You only need to notice. Fear no longer settles the way it used to. Guilt does not anchor as deeply. Urgency has lost its authority. And this is exactly how the final phase begins. It does not begin as an event. It begins as a state of being. We are the Pleiadians. For a very long time, we have observed Earth, not as spectators, but as guardians of the human emotional field. We understand the invisible anatomy of your species, how the heart responds, how the nervous system absorbs narratives, how the soul contracts under constant pressure. And because of that, we say this with precision. The final phase of Earth's liberation has begun now, because humans have started to stop responding. For ages, control existed, because there was emotional resonance with it. Old structures were sustained by fear, dependency, conflict, the need for approval, and the constant sense of threat. When these states lose strength, the system does not collapse, it dries out. You may already notice something very specific. You no longer want to argue to win. You no longer want to explain yourself to be accepted. You no longer want to carry responsibilities that are not yours. You no longer want to prove what you feel. This is not rebellion. This is energetic maturity. And there is an even clearer sign. You recognize falseness faster. And once you see it, you cannot return to the old blindness. The final phase is irreversible, because it does not depend on the world. It depends on an inner shift that has already taken place within you. And if this unsettles you slightly, we understand, because when freedom begins, the old self tries to run back to the prison it knows, but that door no longer opens the same way. We are here to stabilize your field, while the world still pretends nothing has changed. What begins now is the transition from the reactive human to the present human, and this cannot be undone. There was a long period in human history when survival demanded something unnatural. To endure, the heart learned to close, not completely, but enough to function. Feeling became selective. Sensitivity became dangerous. Empathy turned into a liability. Fear did not arrive as an enemy. It arrived as protection. And slowly, that protection began to organize everything. Families adapted around fear. Communities learned obedience. Belief systems replaced inner reference. Power consolidated wherever emotional contraction was normalized. The nervous system adapted so deeply that obeying felt safer than feeling. This was not a failure of humanity. It was an adaptation to prolonged pressure. But every adaptation carries a cost. As generations passed, emotional continuity weakened. Many humans could no longer feel, without immediately seeking control, explanation, or dominance. At that threshold, something essential was at risk. Not intelligence, not survival, but the ability to feel without collapsing. That is when we stepped in, quietly, without disruption, without being seen. We did not interfere with history. We stabilized the emotional field beneath it. We preserved sensitivity inside conditions that would normally extinguish it. We anchored coherence within the collective nervous system, so the heart could pass through time without disappearing. These anchors appeared as humans who never fully adapted to cruelty. They endured pressure, without becoming pressure. They lived within the system, yet never fully belonged to it. If you have always sensed that something in you refused to harden completely, this is why. What was protected in you was not belief, not ideology, not memory. It was continuity of the heart. And now, in this final phase, continuity alone is no longer enough. What remains unspoken stays unstable. What remains unclaimed continues to leak energy back into old emotional circuits. In this phase, the field responds only to declared coherence. When a human consciously names what was preserved, the nervous system receives a clear signal. It stops oscillating. It stops searching for external permission. It stops reopening old emotional wounds. This is not symbolic. This is functional. If this recognition stays silent, the old patterns still have access to you. If it is stated clearly, that access closes. That is why we ask this now. Not for visibility, not for confirmation, but for stabilization. If you recognize that your heart remained alive, when closing it would have been easier, state it clearly. Write the exact sentence in the comments. My heart was preserved. When you write it, your field locks into continuity. The heart stops negotiating with fear. The old structures lose emotional reach. Your presence becomes stable instead of reactive. This is the difference between sensing the shift and becoming anchored inside it. There was a long period in which humanity believed it had lost its way. From our perspective, nothing was lost. What occurred was forgetting, and forgetting was not a failure. It was a necessary phase. Without forgetting, there is no choice. Without choice, there is no true freedom. In earlier cycles, humans knew who they were, but did not yet possess emotional sovereignty. Truth existed, but it was inherited, not embodied. So the field shifted, memory receded, identity fragmented. The external world gained authority over the inner one. This allowed humanity to develop discernment. Under pressure, fear was introduced not as punishment, but as contrast. Limitation not as cruelty, but as compression. During this time, structures of control emerged naturally. They did not invade humanity. They grew from unintegrated fear. Control thrived because the emotional field was reactive. Narratives could hook. Threats could organize behavior. Approval could replace truth. And still, this phase could not continue indefinitely because forgetting has a limit. Once the nervous system matures enough, fear stops educating and starts imprisoning. That point has now been reached. This is why so many humans feel that old narratives no longer convince them, even when they cannot explain why. It is why obedience feels heavier than uncertainty, why false certainty feels more uncomfortable than the unknown. The cycle of forgetting has completed its function. What follows is not remembering facts. It is remembering orientation. Not who am I, but what do I no longer respond to? This is the key distinction. Liberation does not begin when truth is revealed. It begins when the nervous system refuses to be organized by fear. And that refusal is now widespread enough that the old cycle cannot restart. From this point forward, humanity does not return to innocence. It moves into conscious maturity. That is why this phase feels quiet, almost anticlimactic, because the deepest shifts never announce themselves. They simply become undeniable. When the cycle of forgetting began to dissolve, we knew the greatest risk was not chaos in the world, It was instability inside the human nervous system. Liberation, when uncontained, does not produce clarity. It produces confusion, paranoia, and emotional fragmentation. That is why our second intervention began. At the exact moment this phase opened. Not after, not in response to collapse, but in advance. We shifted our focus from preservation to stabilization. As old emotional structures lost authority, many humans began to feel exposed. Without familiar fear patterns, the nervous system searched for replacement threats. Without old identities, the mind tried to rebuild control through anxiety. This is where destabilization could have occurred. So we intervened again. We began regulating the emotional field at a planetary level, not by suppressing emotion, but by slowing its oscillation. This is why many of you noticed something subtle. Moments that would once have triggered panic now pass without attaching. Thoughts arise, but they do not spiral. You still perceive uncertainty, but it no longer overwhelms the body. This is not personal strength. This is field stabilization. We adjusted the rhythm of the human emotional spectrum, so the nervous system could remain present, while old structures dissolve. Without this intervention, liberation would feel like emptiness. With it, liberation feels like grounded clarity. This is why we say, calm in this phase is not indifference. It is integration. And here is why your participation matters. Stabilization is reinforced when humans consciously acknowledge it. When you name stability, your nervous system aligns with it. It stops scanning for threat. It stops recreating fear out of habit. If this stabilization remains unacknowledged, the old reflexes continue to search for dominance. But when it is named, the field locks. If you recognize that something in you remains steady, even while uncertainty exists around you, this is not accidental. State it clearly. Write the exact sentence in the comments. My field is stable. When you do, your nervous system confirms the signal. Fear loses leverage. Old emotional loops disengage. Clarity becomes the default state, instead of a temporary condition. This is how stabilization becomes permanent. And this is why this phase does not collapse into chaos, because it is being held from within and from beyond. The final phase of Earth's liberation will not be remembered as a date. There will be no single moment you can point to and say, this is when it happened, because what is ending does not end through confrontation. It ends through irrelevance. For a very long time, control depended on one thing only: automatic emotional reaction. Fear had to be triggered. Guilt had to be activated. Urgency had to be maintained. As long as the human nervous system reacted, before it could perceive, the system remained alive. What has changed now is not the existence of these forces, but their access to you. They still appear, they still attempt, but they no longer land the same way. You may notice this in subtle moments. You hear words that once would have pulled you into explanation, defense, or conflict, and nothing happens inside your body. You encounter situations that once demanded immediate response, and your nervous system stays neutral. You recognize manipulation without needing to expose it, correct it, or fight it. This is not detachment. It is internal authority. In previous phases, clarity required effort. Now, clarity happens by default. The system does not collapse because someone attacks it. It weakens because fewer humans feed it with fear, attention, and identity. This is why the final phase feels quiet. Noise was never power. Noise was dependency. What depended on reaction cannot survive presence. This quietness can feel unsettling at first. Many humans confuse the absence of pressure with emptiness. But what is dissolving is not meaning, it is external direction. For the first time, the nervous system is not being constantly pulled outward. Without that pull, many discover how much of their identity was built on responding rather than being. This phase does not ask you to fix the world, to awaken others, or to replace old structures with new ones. It asks you to remain present, while relevance rearranges itself, to observe what no longer hooks you, to allow what feels false, to lose access without confrontation, to notice which relationships, roles, and narratives can exist without pressure, guilt, or fear. What survives this phase does not require maintenance. What dissolves was sustained by reaction alone. Earth's liberation does not come from destroying systems. It comes when humans stop organizing their lives around fear-based signals. This is the state stabilizing now. And once this state settles into the nervous system, it does not reverse, because reaction can be reactivated. But presence, once embodied, cannot be forgotten. This is why we call this the final phase. Not because everything ends, but because what remains no longer needs control to exist. In every cycle of planetary transition, there are those who do not arrive to lead, but to stabilize. Starseeds were never meant to stand above humanity. They were meant to stand within it, holding coherence when coherence was rare. You were not placed here to convince, not to awaken through words, not to fight structures that are already dissolving. Your role is quieter and far more effective. You regulate the field by the way you remain present. When you do not react, others unconsciously slow down. When you do not escalate, tension loses fuel. When you do not justify yourself, false authority collapses on its own. This is not personal influence. It is field influence. Throughout history, whenever the emotional field became too unstable, we ensured that certain humans carried a different rhythm, a nervous system that did not amplify fear, a heart that did not close completely, a presence that did not need permission to remain steady. That is why many of you felt as if you arrived early to a place that was not ready yet, why chaos exhausted you more than it energized you, why drama felt heavy instead of meaningful. You were not misaligned. You were regulating. In this final phase, that regulation becomes visible, not as recognition, but as effect. You may notice people feel calmer around you without knowing why. Conflicts lose intensity in your presence. Situations resolve without confrontation. This happens because your field no longer negotiates with fear, and now this role needs to be consciously owned. Unowned regulation remains inconsistent. Owned regulation becomes stable and protective. When you name your role, your nervous system aligns with it. It stops oscillating between engagement and withdrawal. It stops leaking energy into environments that do not deserve access. This is why conscious declaration matters now. If you recognize that your presence stabilizes rather than escalates, state it clearly. Write the exact sentence in the comments. I stabilize the field. When you do this, your system confirms its function. Your energy stops dispersing. Your boundaries strengthen without effort. Your presence becomes protective, not reactive. This is how starseeds fulfill their role. Without force, without hierarchy, and without conflict. And this is why the final phase does not descend into chaos, because enough of you are already holding the field. As old structures lose emotional access, humanity does not fall apart. It reorganizes from within. This phase is not about becoming better, more spiritual, or more evolved in appearance. It is about becoming unable to sustain what is false. Without constant fear signals directing behavior, many humans begin to experience something unfamiliar. They can no longer maintain roles that contradict their inner state. Masks become heavy. Performance becomes exhausting. Pretending begins to drain energy instead of providing safety. Relationships that were held together by guilt, obligation, or unspoken fear start to dissolve without confrontation. Not because people are rejecting each other, but because the emotional glue no longer holds. Identities built on reaction begin to lose coherence. This is not collapse. It is decompression. For a long time, pressure created artificial stability. Now, as pressure recedes, only what is structurally sound remains. Humanity is not becoming divided. It is becoming distinct. Each nervous system settles at the level of regulation it can maintain. Some will still seek external authority, clear instructions, and familiar hierarchies. Others will no longer respond to those signals and will quietly step out of those dynamics. This separation is not dramatic. It is almost invisible. There are fewer arguments, but also fewer forced agreements. Silence replaces justification. Distance replaces resentment. Clarity replaces explanation. You may notice that certain connections fade. Without conflict, without closure conversations, without emotional negotiation. This is not abandonment. It is alignment by resonance. The human emerging from this phase is not driven by ideals or identities. It is guided by inner reference. Decisions become simpler, not because life is easy, but because contradiction is no longer tolerated internally. Questions begin to answer themselves. What requires fear to continue? What needs pressure to exist? What collapses the moment I stop explaining? Anything that depends on emotional distortion loses access naturally. Humanity does not become passive in this phase. It becomes precise. Energy is no longer wasted on managing appearances, maintaining false harmony, or sustaining structures that disregard the nervous system. What remains is quieter, slower, and far more resilient. A humanity that does not need domination to function, not because everyone agrees, but because agreement is no longer required. For presence to remain intact. This is the ground that stabilizes now. And once this state is embodied collectively, control does not return, not by force, but by lack of access. What you are living now is not a transition in progress. It is a threshold already crossed. The old cycle did not end with noise. It ended when it lost access to the human nervous system. And access once lost does not return. We want you to understand this clearly. Nothing needs to be fixed. Nothing needs to be confronted. Nothing needs to be accelerated. The final phase of Earth's liberation is not an action phase. It is a stabilization phase. This is why effort now feels misplaced. Why forcing clarity creates resistance. Why pushing others only drains you. The work is no longer movement. It is presence. We, the Pleiadians, are not guiding humanity towards something new. We are holding the field. While humanity stops feeding what is old, our role is containment, so that freedom does not feel like emptiness. Your role is simpler and more demanding at the same time. Remain present, remain regulated, remain aligned with your inner reference, even when the external world still behaves as if nothing has changed, because this phase does not require belief. It requires consistency. The old structures will continue to speak. They will attempt urgency. They will attempt fear. They will attempt to pull reaction. But they no longer have authority, only access, and access exists only if you provide it. This is the final responsibility of the conscious human, not to fight control, but to deny it emotional entry. When enough humans remain stable, the field does not regress, settles, and settlement is irreversible. If you have listened to this message and recognized yourself within it, there is one final act of alignment, not symbolic, not optional, functional. When you name your position, your nervous system locks into it. Indecision dissolves. Old loops lose leverage. Presence becomes embodied. If you are choosing to remain present, write the exact sentence in the comments. I remain present. By doing this, you are not declaring belief. You are declaring position. And position in this phase is what determines stability. We remain here, silent, attentive, holding the emotional field of Earth. As humanity completes this transition with its own awareness, this phase has already begun, and it does not reverse.